Hi everyone, I'm Harv, Ian Harvey, founder of Collective Intelligence, and this is Stuff That Matters Now. Hey, welcome back everybody, and today I am somewhere in Auckland in some woman's house, and the sun is shining and it's a stunning afternoon, and I've got the opportunity to sit down and talk with Kylie Bailey, who has just released a book and that's just on the market, which I have read in preparation for this. And a funny story, I'll tell you very soon how we got to this. But welcome, Kylie. Thank you for talking to me.
Kia ora, Harv. Lovely to be here.
So this is what happened. I was in Wellington talking on the phone outside a restaurant one evening, and I hear this noise, and I turn around and these women are banging on the window at me, and I'm going, who are these people? And Kylie and some other work colleagues, Joe Patterson and another woman and Kylie had helped our business Collective Intelligence with the marketing a few years ago, and we worked a lot with Kylie, and here was this group banging on the window, and so I popped inside and we had a lovely banter and chat and so forth, and Kylie had told me that she'd written a book. And I said, I can't remember what I said. I said, let's do a podcast about it, because I was really intrigued with it. And I said, you sent me the book, and I felt immediately embarrassed when Kylie sent me the book, because I thought it was going to be some tatty old little bloody 20-page paperback. And what arrived was this stunning hardback, beautiful book with a message written in it. And I just went, oh... Yeah, so it was a lovely surprise, Kylie, and congratulations on the book. It's fabulous.
Thank you, Harv. Well, you said there was no guarantees for me to be here today because you were going to read the book first. So I'm pleased we got through the guarantee, and hopefully we get the seal of approval, right?
I had been drinking, Kylie. I'm just sort of, I'd had a red wine, and I said if the book was boring, then forget about the podcast. But lo and behold, and it's on... The book is entitled Good For You, and you've written it in conjunction with Claire Chitham.
Yep.
And the two of you put this together. And the cool thing is we are making this podcast in the garage that you two have put this together, and behind you are a whole lot of notes and so forth that were the framework of the book, and which is very cool. So I always like being able to do that. And when you sent me, because I thought we were just going to do this downtown Auckland, but we're actually at the heart of where the book was written.
Yeah, and we're probably about the same time of this time last year when the book was being written. So the temperature in the garage is a little cool, and it does remind us, I guess, of the mahi that we put in over June, July, August last year to produce this together. So process of writing a book with two people was an interesting one, but we've got a product and we're pretty darn proud of it.
Yep, and look, we'll get to that. So Kylie, just give us a quick background. Who the hell are you? Where have you come from?
Yeah, what on earth am I doing here with Harv in the garage?
No, that's not the question. Oh, no, I hadn't thought of that.
So my background, I'm a West Coast kid. I grew up out at Piha on the coast of Auckland, and always had pretty big dreams. I was a dancer as a child, but pretty quickly as I became a teenager realised that I didn't quite have the figure to be a ballerina. I'm just shy of 5'2", and I'm pretty chunky around the hips and thighs with short legs and wide feet. None of those things are good for being a ballerina. And so I gave that up, and I decided that I had better focus on something that was going to be a stable career. And so I went into journalism. And I think I was about 21 when I got my first job. I was working as the TV editor at Women's Day magazine. It was a big publication, but to be honest, when I was at journalism school in my last year, there were two jobs that were going at this particular media organisation. And one was to be editorial assistant of North and South, and the other was to be the TV editor of Women's Day. And everybody in the course, except for me, applied to be the editorial assistant at North and South. And I think only a handful of people applied to be the TV editor at Women's Day. So I jumped into this world of tabloid magazines, quite young and fresh. I remember the day I turned up to these fancy offices downtown in Auckland, and I had twin plaits and a khaki jumper on. Needless to say, I still look like that girl from the coast. And I was pretty blown away by these women with kind of, blow-dried hair and designer clothing. And what quickly became apparent is that women's magazines, weekly women's magazines, are actually the heart of women's storytelling in New Zealand, and they were and are the commercial engine of some of those large publishing houses. So I made the right choice not to go to North and South and to be at Women's Day, and I quickly saw how empowering it was to be able to tell stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things and extraordinary people doing ordinary things. So I was TV editor for a good couple of years there, and really wasn't actually that keen to become a writer, but had an editor, Louise Wright, shout out to Lou, who really saw potential in me and offered me the same job a couple of times over and kept saying to me, I'm going to come back and I'm going to offer you that job again. And so a couple of years in, I became a staff writer for Women's Day, and that involved me flying around New Zealand, talking to lots of different people. Like I remember going to Invercargill and talking to Janice Poe's family. Janice was the first person to take a class action lawsuit out against a cigarette company. And then I was obviously working with celebrities and well-known personalities and interviewing them and telling their stories. And I was really engaged with working with the women that I was working with in that organisation, and also the opportunity to tell female stories. And so that led me through a career that has included Next and Clio magazine, and I've been deputy editor on New Idea, New Zealand Women's Weekly, Women's Day a couple of times over. Pretty high stress, full on, deadlines 5 days a week, reading 120 pages 2 times over. But I really thrived in that environment and, spent kind of 15 years working there. And then I got made redundant, and that was in 2014. So it was before a lot of the kind of print industry had really started to crash. I shouldn't say crash, I should say really evolve, because things are now very different. And when I got made redundant, I was 2IC at Women's Day. I really thought I was sitting at the precipice of a pretty amazing editing career, and it never actually manifested or eventuated for me. And so I left the organisation and went out into the world and started working with a Californian tech entrepreneur in a digital startup. And that sort of started to bring together storytelling and also the digital tools that were available to me through digital marketing and things like that. So I ran a team there I ran Localist for a couple of years and was working with another fabulous woman who I had met and was her deputy editor at Next, Christina Sayers-Wickstead. She was the general manager of Localist and I was the content editor, and really we were given a big platform created by New Zealand Post, but we stripped it right back to a startup, and we started to work with journalists getting involved with telling stories of local businesses. And so I drove a bright pink combi around Auckland. We had a little office in Franklin Road in Ponsonby, and it was cool. It was an interesting journey. And as part of that journey, I was literally walking to the cafe one day. I think this was about 2016, so it's a couple of years after I'd been made redundant, been working in this digital tech startup. And at the same time, I had started to get really interested in health and wellness. And I was publishing for somebody in Australia and ghostwriting for him, and was starting to learn about health and nutrition for myself and also apply that to myself. And as I walked around the corner, went to the cafe to get my coffee, I bumped into this actress called Claire Chitham. And Claire and I had crossed paths a little bit in women's magazines. I think, I'd done some stories on her, but we'd never really actually had a close relationship. However, a friend of mine, prior to me bumping into her, I'd said to her, actually, I think we need a better conversation around wellness and health in New Zealand. And I feel like I'm positioned to help start that conversation based on what I know and, what my experience is. And she said to me, you need to get together with Claire Chitham because she's got a similar idea. And so, lo and behold, I was just actually thinking when I walked around that corner, I'm ready to do my own thing now. I'm ready to do my own business. I've had these different life cycles and experience in my business life, and I'm ready to do something fresh. And lo and behold, Claire was on a date. She was sitting at the table outside this little cafe called Queenie's, and I bumped into her. And being a journalist, you get pretty good at being forthright up front and asking for exactly what you need. So I didn't really shy away from the conversation. I think directly I said, hey, so I hear you want to start a blog on wellness. And Claire was kind of looking at me thinking, A, how do you know that? And B, I'm not really sure, but yeah, okay, let's do it. So we decided there and then that we'd meet at her house in Greylin a couple of weeks later. And that's when we sat down around her kitchen table, and she said to me, I've got this idea, and I've had this idea since I was living in LA, and I've tried to kind of start it, but I'm not really sure where to go. And she said, that idea is good for you. And she said, it's about telling stories of good people, good places, and good things. And I was like, that's really similar to what I want to do. And so that was 2016, and that was essentially the genesis of what we've created and what we've gone on to produce today.
And how did the date go, do you think, with Claire?
Well, the dude's not around, so...
Okay, so not that well. All right. I want to go right back to the beginning. Why journalism?
Journalism because I was good at English, and I was always really interested in people. I was interested in people's stories, and I was interested in interacting with people. And so what's really fascinating about being a journalist, and why I think, often journalism is a generational thing. So mother, daughter, granddaughter will be journalists. I don't come from a legacy like that at all. My background, my papa had a trucking business, which was a startup, and he made that to be a very, very successful transport business. But I don't come from a background of a long line of journalists at all. But what I was interested in was people, and I quickly realised that when you, as you'll know from doing these podcasts, when you sit down with people and you start to interview them, you're given a quick slice into their life. But also when you walk away from that interview, there's a lot that you take with you personally, because there's a lot of life that people are quite happy to reveal in an interview situation that you would never really get to learn or understand otherwise. And so I was always drawn to doing journalism around people, and that was kind of the early stages of my career. In the last, kind of 6 to 8 years, I've got really interested in telling stories that are based and backed by science, and also based and backed by the experience of what I've learnt and what I feel. So journalism for me is a portal into other people's worlds, and now it's become a portal into my own world. And I pretty much just tell the stories of what I do every day. There's no fluff, gold tights. There's a bit of green smoothies, but, not too many bells and whistles around it. And that real, authentic nature of storytelling, I think, is what keeps bringing me back to journalism.
And the thing that Kylie does better than anybody else is what? Or have you already given me that answer?
I think that's evolved and changed a lot. So the thing that I was really good at doing was extracting stories out of people that were quite personally raw. when you're a journalist and you're in the room, and I actually remember when you were starting this podcast and we were talking about the interview process, you know, I said to you that thing where it's like, don't turn off the machine at the end of the interview, right? You remember that, right? Because that's where the gold comes through. Like, that's when somebody is comfortable enough and suddenly you get under the skin of it. And now I tell stories about myself and what I do and the experiences that I've had. And that realness and rawness is actually now me. And so that, yeah, I guess that's, I don't know whether it answers your question, but that's kind of why I keep coming back to it, I think.
Yeah. And Kylie, so a number of reactions when I opened the book and took it out of its cardboard casing. One, I felt a bit of a dick because the quality of it, I don't know what I was expecting, but it wasn't that. It was, and we've had this conversation, so for people going, what's this twat on about? I've already forgiven, Kylie's already forgiven me for this, but it was, so there was one, it was beautifully presented, so I shouldn't have been surprised about that. It's a hardcover, it's a beautiful coffee table type book. And then I thought, I've got to read this before the podcast.
And it's really long.
And I thought, oh, God, this guy, about wellness. And then I opened it up, and it was really interesting because both you and Claire have got different journeys, but you talked about the problems and then what you've needed to do to create a different world for yourselves. And that was really interesting, that it was a book of action. It wasn't a book of being lectured to about what we should do, but it was about what you guys had done yourselves and what impact it had made on your lives. And so I read it, and it was, and it's something that I'll be able to go back to at time as well.
Awesome.
You know? Yeah. And so, and I'm really interested in, what did you want to achieve with writing this book? What was the thing that, because there's lots of wellness books out there, Kylie. The world doesn't need another bloody wellness book, right?
Sure,
so
doesn't need another cookbook either.
No.
It's not a cookbook, by the way. There's no recipes in it whatsoever.
So tell me, what did you want this book to do that other books hadn't done?
A big part of why we wanted to do this book was we wanted to really formulate what good for you was in something. And we'd been a startup, you know, we still are a startup. We'd been a startup since 2016. With the help of a friend in Melbourne, we created a website. We'd done everything on the smell of an oily rag. And a good friend of ours, who's a publisher in America, said, why don't you write a book? And we were actually sitting in this garage on a couch that was over there on the Zoom. And Claire and I looked at each other and went, you know what, let's write a book. And so we realised in the process of putting the book together, and two people writing a book is, you know, it's an interesting thing, that our experience and our ability to take these little actions on a daily basis, when we reflected on our own personal stories, we realised that that's what adds up for us every day to kind of feeling and being well. And, you know, without kind of talking in cliches, the reality is that you can't have wealth if you don't have health. And health is really like the fundamental. And I learnt that personally through my own experience, you know, that, you know, of literally breaking down to be building myself back up. And so we realised that because we don't have a filter, essentially, Claire, you know, spent most of her teenage years and early 20s on Shortland Street. I spent most of my early 20s and 30s editing women's magazines. So we were quite happy to step up and just, you know, kind of real and raw talk about exactly what had happened to us. And So writing the book for us was a chance to actually get down what we knew Good For You could be. And it's interesting, right, that alchemy, like I've ghostwritten books for other people, and so I've written books on my own. But writing a book with somebody else, while it was a bit of a torturous process at times, we're still together today. You know, the date that she had, she's not with the bloke, but she's still working with me. So you got to take something in there. But I think the other thing is that alchemy of creation meant that when we started the process, we went away individually and we wrote our own personal stories. And we pretty much realised that in order for us to give something different to the market, we had to really give ourselves. And so we started there. And for me, you know, Claire's been in the public eye for a long time. I'm a pretty private person. But as soon as I started to write about the issues that I'd had with anxiety and how that manifested through my life and what that's led to, you know, to me doing today, to writing and teaching yoga and, you know, doing these other things that I do, you know, I was kind of struck by how happy I was to sort of put things on the page. And I had a really interesting experience a couple of weeks ago. My dad lives in Gisborne. He's always been super supportive of my career, but I think he thinks I'm pretty fucking crazy, to be honest, to be trying to be an entrepreneur and create a health and wellness brand. And so he was a bit, you know, never kind of that engaged in the book. And I gave him a copy of the book, and he read the book. And the next morning he came to me and he had tears in his eyes. And he said, "I'm really sorry for what I put you through." And I said, "You don't have to be sorry," because him and my mum divorced. And essentially in the book, you know, if you get the book and you read the book, essentially that was when I wrote my story. I realised as a teenager that was the turning point for me. That's really where my anxiety started to manifest itself as a condition. And actually, you know, it's the challenges in life that we face that kind of make the person that we are today. So I was really thankful that I'd been through that experience, because it's given me the lens for what I do now. And his emotionality around it, I thought was actually really quite sweet, you know, because I said to him, "You don't need to take this on board. It's not about the fact you got divorced. It's about the fact that on reflection of my life, you know, there are things in hindsight that you realise those were turning points for my health, and I could have made a decision to go one way or the other. And in my case, I just, you know, I made the decision to go hard or go home. And so I went hard in my career, and as a result, my health suffered."
Lots to ponder on that, Kylie. I had this conversation with somebody recently that, you know, with kids, we don't actively set up to give them an adverse life. We do the opposite. We set up to give them this wonderful life. But the fact is, they need adversity. And how do you create that and not, you know, it's an interesting balancing act, because I have seen plenty of kids that have not faced enough adversity from lots of different generations, not just the current one, but, you know, I know people in my generation that didn't face adversity as kids, and they really struggled later on because they didn't have the tools and so forth. And that adversity of it going through a divorce could have manifested itself in lots of different ways. And maybe it's not even that related. Maybe it was something else that was going on as well. You know, these are complex things, but it's about what you do with that once you've been through that stuff.
And if you don't, you know, if you don't have shit, how do you ever get your shit together? You know, if you don't face challenges, how do you ever know what is a dark day and what is a good day? And, you know, the process of writing about yourself is actually really cathartic, because you get to reflect on some of these things. And while my dad came in the book, with the lens of that turning point at 14 or 15 was the thing that kicked off the anxiety, the reality is when I reflected and was writing about my story, I realised that ever since I was a little tiny girl, I used to wake up and my heart was hammering 100 miles an hour and I was ready to go. So, I've always kind of been driven and on the ambition and adrenaline side of life. I think just, the way that manifested was, an ongoing issue with anxiety that I didn't even really know was anxiety and didn't even really know that that's what it was called. And it wasn't until I started to work with my health and learn more about, what I put in my mouth has a result to the way I think, what I put in my mouth has an effect on my gut, all that stuff. Until I tested it out on myself, I didn't really know that it worked. And today, kind of 6-7 years on, maybe 10 years on from where I was that anxious, crying, balled up in a corner of a toilet mess on a 2-3 days a week. Nobody would have known, but I was, in the toilet occasionally having a good cry. And I didn't even really know then that crying was actually good for you, because crying is good for you. You got to release that emotion. You've got to let that go. And now kind of, 10 years on, I'm I forget on many days that I even have suffered from anxiety or that I get anxious. It's only when my heart starts to go again and my shoulder starts to tighten up. Those are like signs to me. You need to kind of back off what you're doing and you need to get involved with finding a little bit of balance in your life.
Kylie, we've got a wonderful array of facilitators, and most, if not all, I'm just thinking, all of them are really healthy, all of them are really conscious of their health and really good at looking after themselves in different ways, all in different ways. That's the thing I was reflecting on. And they've got different practices. And one in particular I'm going to talk about is Amanda Jane Johnson, who helped me significantly, and they've all helped me in their own ways, but she helped me with around listening to my body. And I remember the first time she said, if you need to listen to your body, I'm going, fuck off, what are you on? What are you talking about? And I was brought up, farming, where, physically it's tough and so forth, and the pain is something to work through. It's not, you don't acknowledge the pain, you work through it and so forth. And so listening to the body was a new thing. The other one was that food wasn't just to taste good. Food was actually nourishment, right? And I know that sounds really basic, but I'd never thought about food in that way, literally. And the effect that food has on you at different times. And so I had lunch before I came to here, and I chose something that was a salad and light and so forth, so that I didn't go to sleep. And I would, and I would have never made that choice before. I would have just gone, well, there's a nice pie, I'll have a pie. And I'll be sitting here now going to stay awake and, feeling and just thinking I'm a bit tired. So it's really quite interesting to just be bloody conscious about that the body and the heart and the head and all, we can have a huge impact on it.
Yeah, absolutely. And, sometimes the reality is, balance is a word for a reason, because balance means balance. Like it's an oscillation between two different points, right? So you go for the salad when you've got to make a choice about what you're doing next. You want the brain to function, you want the body to follow. But sometimes you just got to have the pie. Because, in New Zealand, we make great pies. And don't get me wrong, I'm a big fan of a good steak pie, as long as your steak's organic. But, most of the time I choose to eat gluten-free and dairy-free because that's what helps me function best. And I think, you mentioned earlier about why did we write this book. I wasn't seeing, personally, as a journalist and editor, I wasn't seeing mainstream conversation about nutrition as being an entry point in. And I was also pretty concerned about the rise in the medicated generation that's coming through. So, without kind of getting into the detail behind it, the reality is there's I realized there was some pretty basic messages that we could be sharing with people, that it doesn't have to be prescriptive or dogmatic. You have to wear the gold tights. You have to drink the matcha latte. You have to have, half coconut milk, half, well, I would never have soy, but, because soy's not so good for you. But, you've got to have all these things to make sure that, you're being well. The reality is wellness comes from those little actions that you want to take every single day. And as you, and that's why I'm so fascinated still by nutrition, and because food is an entry point. For me, it was my way in. For my husband, who, he was knocking on the door of being pre-diabetic just kind of 5 or 6 years ago, and he has completely turned around his whole well-being, and he started with nutrition too. And it's just being aware of, when I put this food into my mouth, how does my body feel afterwards? Or how does my brain feel? And, the other night, for example, I don't eat sugar much at all, but it was somebody's birthday and there was cheesecake, and we had the cheesecake, and the next morning I woke up and my heart was like rat-a-tat-tat-tat-tat-tat-tat in my chest. And I was like, that's why I don't eat the cheesecake anymore. Because it doesn't sit well for me personally in my body. And so we wanted to really open up that conversation around, this is about your choice. It's not about, and what you do as Harv is different from what I do as Kylie. And all of us, though, at the end of the day, we're made up of skin, muscle, bone, tissue. We drink, we fart, we poop. We do all these things as humans. That makes, you're male, I'm female. But apart from those differences in the reproductive organs, there's not a lot of difference in the way our bodies function. And there's not a lot of difference in the way our bodies function now to the way they functioned, way back when we were living in caves. And so it makes sense to start to think, well, how do I actually optimize the way my systems function by making choices? And little choices every day, they add up to big stuff.
Yeah, the compounding effect.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that, the cheesecake analogy is that's the thing that I am trying to work on, is actually be conscious of, if I do that, what happens down here. And because I didn't associate the two, I didn't associate what I ate with how I felt later on, right? And that might sound really crazy, but it's absolutely true. And so now I am a little bit more aware of that stuff, and I'm also aware that I'll turn 62 in a few months, and there's a whole lot of stuff I still want to do.
Absolutely.
And I don't want to do them as a cripple or a derelict. I want to do them as an active, vibrant person. And the only person that can influence that is me.
100%, yeah.
And yet I still struggle with it, right? I still struggle to take my self-care to put it at the top of the pile.
And you know what? We all do, because in this world we are conditioned to live to achieve. I mean, that's just how we were raised. And, kind of shout out to my papa, who had his own business, which really inspired my work ethic to want to create something and be something for myself. And yet that work ethic piece for me was actually what ran me into the ground, because I didn't have the listening as the counterpoint. And, you mentioned earlier about your facilitators and how they have a whole lot of different practices. Everyone does different stuff. for Claire and I, this is kind of the alchemy of our relationship, is that her and I do totally different stuff. You know, we take care of ourselves in completely different ways. I'll be boiling up the bone broth and the fish carcasses that my hubby's caught, and she'll be cranking the latest collagen powder. I'm interested in what she's doing with the collagen powder. She's interested in what I'm doing with the bone broth. We realised that in writing the book, or wanting to put the book together, like you asked before, why did we do it, is we weren't seeing something out there that just helped anyone understand what is naturopathy, what is Reiki, what is kinesiology. There's all these kind of wellness buzz terms out there, but when you actually get to the heart of what these are just practices, and they're practices that are delivered to people by practitioners who are, you know, really experienced in what they do. And how does a practitioner know something? A practitioner knows something because they practice it.
Kylie, you talk about and I hadn't put this together before, because you talked about your startup with me, I know, a couple of years ago, and I hadn't associated the book with the startup, right? And where to from here with Good For You?
Where to from here is,
apart from selling shitloads of books,
yeah,
and there'll be a link to your website on this podcast, so people can find the book, and it looks cool, it reads well, and it's bloody interesting.
Thank you.
And so that link will be there. But what else for Good For You?
Well, where to from here is really, the book is a springboard for us to now move into creating this world of Good For You. And what we're wanting to do is, you know, Claire and I have kind of been through the hard stuff together in a startup. We've been through the conversations of, you know what, we're putting all our time and energy, our spare time and energy into this. Is it worth doing? Maybe we're just better to, you know, kick it in the butt and not conclude it. And I think by putting the book together and having some of the reactions that we've had, and, you know, we've had some really positive conversations around it, we've realised that, hell yeah, we've got something here. And so what we're wanting to do is, you know, keep empowering women, because we talk to women because we are women. It doesn't mean that as a man you can't take something away from what we do. But what we want to keep doing is empowering women by telling real stories of health and wellness. And health will always evolve because there's always new science, right? Like, you never know the end game. So you might think one thing about nutrition, but then a study comes out that says something else. This is what's so fascinating about it. And what we want to do is take it out of the world of, you know, I mentioned before the wellness gongs and the gold tights. To be perfectly honest, my happy space, I don't wear gold tights, but my happy space is in a pair of yoga tights teaching yoga in my studio, right? That's my happy place. But let's kind of strip all the shit out of it and get really real about what we're doing here. We're actually feeding the system and the body. And so that's what we want to do. We want to grow this this brand so that people know that Good For You is a trusted resource that you can come to navigate your way through whatever kind of health challenge you might have. And we are not the experts, you know. I'm just a magazine hack. Claire's just an actress. What we're good at doing is telling stories, and we're good at being the conduit to connect you to those people who are experts or to those practitioners. And so we want to be doing that, you know, on a national level and potentially on a global scale, because we've realised that the way that we talk and the way that we language stuff and our ability just to kind of front up, you know, in a t-shirt and shorts and get involved is actually what is original for us. It's what's unique.
So I read the book. I didn't once think it was for women.
Well, that's good. Yeah.
That's classic. So when you say that, I went, oh yeah, there was a whole lot of women in it. Namely you two. So interesting.
Did you miss the bit on menstrual cycles?
Oh, well, yeah, but I mean, that's you know, we don't have those, but that didn't exclude me from the book. No, so I'm just reflecting on that. I was quite happy reading the book as a bloke, because I wouldn't have read the book if I didn't, and I wouldn't be sitting here if I didn't like the book.
Yeah, absolutely. So, so obviously maybe it transcends a little bit, but we have to come from our area of experience.
Yeah.
And what we've realised is that we are a connection point for people, and because Claire is known, she's a recognisable face. She was Waverley on Shortland Street, so if you were back in the day of original Shortland Street, you probably remember her behind the desk at Ferndale, behind the desk in the hospital for Shortland Street fans. That was not Ferndale. Ferndale's the actual suburb. I do know my Shortland Street fact and fiction. So the thing is Claire is like known as in every person, and she's quite happy and easily able to adopt that role when she's talking to people. And so that breaks down a lot of barriers around what I was seeing personally, and what she was saying was that there was a wellness world out there, but they were all talking to themselves in this one little bubble. And that wasn't actually reaching ordinary people who, we've got rates of cancer skyrocketing, rates of heart disease, rates of diabetes, Alzheimer's being called, the third cancer. How do we actually live in a way where we make choices now? We're both in our 40s. How do we make choices now that mean at 70, at 80, potentially at 90, we are still able to function in the systematic body thing that we live in? And for me, that, personally, that's what led me to yoga. And that's why yoga has become the other way or language for me to communicate through, along with words. Because, yoga has, a regular yoga practice has that effect on you. It increases your perceptual acuity and your power of observation. And so we really, at the heart, it heartens me that you didn't think it was a book for women, because we really want to help and support as many people as possible to be able to unlock their own health and vitality.
Well, look, it was a book about women, but I didn't see it as a book for women.
Yeah, that's
right.
Great.
So there's so but I can be really thick with missing stuff like that, but that's not how. Didn't come across like that for me at all. And the other thing that I was interested today, because in the book there's photos of you, and smiling and all that sort of shit and being friends and
because I don't really smile often.
And running up the fucking beach. What's with that? You two of them going for a run, smiling and going, that's fake. And I was really interested today. Like the two of you in the book looked as though you were enjoying each other's company, right? So I wanted to turn up today and go, I wonder if that's real. Right? After going through writing a book together, because I'm always intrigued to see, if that actually... But the energy between you is fabulous.
And that's, this from the work that you do in collective intelligence. One man is an island. You can't be siloed. One woman is an island. You can't be siloed. And the reality is when you collaborate with somebody, there's something that comes in that collaboration that brings more than you can bring yourself. And, you mentioned the photos in the book. We shot that in August last year. It was freezing cold. I was deeply uncomfortable about being in front of the camera because I was used to being behind the camera and directing stuff. We were working with two friends who I'd spent a lot of time in the magazine industry creating photo shoots and stuff with. And Claire is an absolute natural in front of the camera. So we were freezing our asses off, or should I say freezing our tits off, and we were trying to make it look as summery as possible because we'd been told by the publisher that the book was going to come out in the summer. And funny story about that photo shoot, it was over 2 days at Piha, and we sort of forgot about catering for our lovely friends who'd done the shoot. And we were staying in this house, and we said to them, you know, they were supposed to go home on the first night and sleep in Auckland and then come back. And we went, oh, no, just stay at Piha, it'll be fine. We'll go to the bowling club for dinner. And I go home to get ready. Claire rings me. She goes, oh, the bowling club's closed.
I was just waiting for that. I was just waiting for that.
So the two of us are like, uh-oh, what are we going to put together for dinner? My husband kind of steps in and goes, well, we've got this and this. And then we called a friend from down the road, and she said, well, I've got this. And, you know, we kind of produced this meal for these two amazing, you know, the photographer and makeup artist who had spent, you know, 8 to 10 hours on the beach with us, absolutely freezing as well. So it's kind of interesting that I remember going with Suzanne Paul to visit a psychic in Australia once for a story, and I spent some time, you know, staying with Suzanne over a kind of 2 or 3 day period, and she had her beautiful Louis Vuitton luggage, and, you know, she never travels anywhere without Louis. But we had some really great deep conversations around her kind of rise as an entrepreneur, and, you know, rise and fall actually, and then rise again. And she said to me, "You just fake it till you make it," and that's kind of, you know, that's always stuck with me, because the reality is it's great that you think that the photos were shot in summer, but behind the scenes, you know, we were actually freezing cold, and we knew that in order for people to engage with a book, we needed to look really healthy, well, and vital, and we needed to present something that was, you know, fun and energetic. But the energy between Claire and I is real, and, you know, we've got her friend in Melbourne, Amy, shout out to Amy, who has, you know, tirelessly worked on this project with us for the last kind of 4 or 5 years. And we've now got another person who's based in Bali who's come on board, Zoe, to support us with some of the administration and content. And the other day, you know, we were having a meeting, and the piece of feedback was, every time I touch this project, I feel so alive. And that's how we know that there's something in this, because we feel alive when we create good for you. And so getting some of the feedback on the book and having people say, you know, it made me want to do this or do that, that's the reason why we're going to keep rocking this little startup and see where we can take it.
The day after I finished the book, I came back into the office and brought it back to give it to Bettina in the office, and brought my lunch to work, and Kate had put some extra celery sticks in my lunch for me, and I'm sitting there munching on my celery sticks, and it was Michelle who started with this and goes, "Geez, the book's worked already." I said, "No, I eat celery from time to time. I eat the celery," and whether that was conscious or not, I don't know. But it was like, I've read the book now, I'm going to eat some celery.
It's good if it made you eat celery.
I'm not giving you any credit for the celery.
Well, hey, it will have been good for your gut and your bowel, because it's full of prebiotics. Sorry, so it will have kind of flushed you out, you know, which is always a good thing, right?
It's a good thing. It's a good thing. And you're right about the health thing. You know, I had a father who was started off life as a very, very ill, and it was epilepsy, and it wasn't talked about, and it was hidden, and he was on medication all his life, and then in later years he developed pretty bad asthma, and he never had good health, and he really made the most of life, and he'd wake up in the morning and he'd say, "It's a bloody good day," because you know, the epilepsy certainly in his early life was debilitating, and that was something I think because he really valued health, didn't look after himself particularly well, but when he woke up in the morning and he felt good, it really mattered to him. It really mattered to him. And And, our health as a nation is not improving. It's going the other way. And both in lots of different areas. And we cannot medicate our way out of this. We have got to change a whole lot of systems, whether it's food production, all the way through. A whole lot of systems have got to change.
Exactly. And I think the thing about, I mentioned before that we're not that different from when we lived in a cave. At a systemic level, the reality is, while we're not that different, the environmental factors around us are completely different. So, I know that there's a little bit of controversy around why have dairy, why don't have dairy, why eat gluten, why don't eat gluten, why be a vegetarian, why be a vegan. I'm not a vegetarian, I'm not a vegan, I love a good steak, provided it's grass-fed. I'm pretty clean eating because I give a shit about where my food comes from. And I think we've got very disconnected with not only our food sources, but with also ourselves. And in that disconnection, we see, the rise. I can only talk to my own experience. What I experienced was mental health, problems with mental health. And so much of that was alleviated by good nutrition, having some sort of practice. Mine just happens to be yoga and meditation, but it can be whatever your practice is. Getting out in nature is something that's really important for me. Putting my feet in the sand on a regular basis. I'm blessed enough to live at the beach, but the reality is you can walk outside your office door, and I used to do this when I worked in the city, take your shoes off, put your feet on the ground. That changes the vibration within you. And the reality is we kind of have to keep our vibration the same as when we lived in a cave. Yet if you think about it, we have lights on 24/7. We have a phone that bang, 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 have my attention, have my attention. So what is actually precious in this world is how do you cultivate good health and good attention? How do you be attentive to yourself? And you can't do that unless you are in a stable or balanced place, And I've just unfortunately had a really sad personal tragedy where a close friend of ours committed suicide a couple of weeks ago. And he was at the very end of quite a rapidly progressing challenge with mental health, and ultimately it led to him taking his life. Now, if we can develop systems and structures that allow people to be their best selves and allow people to be as balanced as possible, then we don't end up at the end game. And in New Zealand, we've got a real problem with suicide. We've got a real problem with not talking about our feelings and not talking about our emotions. And if we bury those down and we hold those in, the body, the tissue, it stores all of that trauma. And so we have to actively find a way to release it. That's why crying's good for you.
Yeah. It's 3 of the last 4 podcasts, Kylie, have talked about suicide.
Yeah, it's a problem, right?
It's a big issue, and it's funny, I was talking about it earlier today, that we should have one of the lowest suicide rates in the world, given where we live, in this stunning country, not overpopulated, and we don't. We have the opposite. And so there is lots of things we need to sort out, and I got to interview Carla Nanagorm, who heads a suicide prevention program for New Zealand, and yep, it's there are lots and lots and lots of factors that contribute to it, and none of them are going to be fixed overnight. But certainly, healthier diet, all those sort of things, makes a big difference.
And as individuals, we, and I say this with a caveat, provided you are in a place where you can feed yourself, you can house yourself, you can pay your bills. Those basic survival things are needed in order for you to then be able to work on your health. You know, it's not something that you can do if you're in a state of survival mode.
Yep.
But as individuals, if we are in those places where we are safe in the place that we live, and we are educating ourselves about what we put in our mouths, and we're making the best choices that we can at any given moment for ourselves, we as individuals can actually completely transform. We're kind of like the chrysalis to the butterfly, right? But that takes a bit of work. And I think that's the thing about Good For You, is that you kind of don't want to shy away from this stuff. Like, fall in love with feeling good. Fall in love with what it feels like to wake up in the morning and go, hell yeah, what are we doing today? And, you know, fall in love with having stamina. And also fall in love with just disconnecting. Like, you don't have to have the most likes. You don't have to have the most friends. You don't actually need that many friends. You know, you need connection. But if you spend all of your time outwardly seeking that type of approval, how do you have any time to listen to yourself and to care for yourself? And at the end of the day, when all is said and done, we only have ourselves. And you've got to have your back, because nobody else is going to have your back.
What a great statement.
It's the gold, eh?
What a great statement. And I'm listening to that, Kylie, and going, what do I want to say? I think that's a really good place to end on, because I sit there and go, nobody else is, it's up to you. So I've got nothing more to ask or to say. I'm going to ask you, is there anything else you would like to say to finish off this podcast?
Just find what's good for you. You know, find those things that light you up, that make you feel good, and make the time to do more of those, because you matter.
Kylie, thank you. And good luck with the next steps. Good luck with the book sales. I'm really looking forward to seeing where you and Claire get to next, and it is lovely to see the two of you together.
Thanks, Harv. It's really special to be on the podcast. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
You've just been listening to an episode of Stuff That Matters Now, brought to you by Collective Intelligence. I hope you enjoyed listening to the fun stuff, the rugged stuff, and the complete stuff-ups that have helped this particular Collective Intelligence member evolve while making the world a better place. Do check out our Stuff That Matters Now podcast series on your favourite podcast provider, or visit our website www.collectiveintelligence.co.nz to get links to new episodes. Contact us if you want to learn more about how we can help you evolve yourself and others. Thanks for listening.